Well, I'm back from Disneyland. I was at Disneyland all week last week, right across the street. In fact, I heard all kinds of stories about things like that with magnets, but I won't go into those. All right. We left off after what the great period of time that is called the Saturn period. And we talked about the principle of rest, sinking back into chaos and letting go of cosmos. And in a way, I think it is something similar to our own experience. I think that God, the Divine Spirit, warms up to manifesting. And a concentration is held so long, and then it is relaxed because that's necessity. That when you're working into something like that, you have to build up strength. So it's not only a matter of wisdom that there are breaks called rest, and that these breaks, in the normal long version of this talk, this is still the recapitulation, the amount of rest that is done in the cosmos by far outstrips the amount of time that is spent in manifestation. I'll just give you a mathematical example of it, just so you can get a rough idea. And we'll use linear time of the kind we think of now. But just assume that between the great creations, like the creations we're talking about now, suppose it's half of the time in manifestation and half of the time in non-manifestation. But then, between each period of manifestation, let's just say that there are only 3 periods because it's easier to draw just 3 parts. There's still rests between each period. Then between each revolution, there are rests. There'd be 7 little bitty rests in here. And then between each epoch. And so it turns out to be something that in the cosmos, that you could almost say, if you wanted to be profane about it, that God is a very lazy sluggard. It turns out that 90-some% of the time, I think it's either 93 or 97% of the time, if you think in terms of linear time, is spent in rest. Of course, when you get deeper and deeper into manifestation, like in the Earth period, the rests, like even when we sleep at night, we're not as deeply as unconscious as the unconsciousness between the periods that we're talking about. So the rest isn't just rest in the return to chaos. There is a return to the original source. And in that, something of genius is born. Now, when we talked about Saturn, we talked about being worked on. We're just talking about human beings right now. We as human beings were worked on by the gods. And they made forms of us to try to impress within us the capability of taking and transforming form. And this experience of having repeated forms, when you added to that the element of genius from rest, and then came out into manifestation again, then forms could extend themselves without having to be different forms. Like that element of genius and the element of restful time brought out that capability, which is the capability of growth. So that there was then an internal consciousness that in what is called the Sun period, that when we went from the Saturn period to the Sun period, we went from being plant-like, mineral-like, to being plant-like. That is, we could take a form and we could extend it. We could extend it in time and we could extend it in space. And in this, the whole of the cosmos also changed. The cosmos changed such that what was just defined as warmth before, as the divine now worked deeper into matter and had the experience of the previous period assimilated in the form of rest, it became illumined. And that's why this period is called the sun period. Hot, or especially cold in the exoteric sense, relates to Saturn. Light and life relate to the sun. So it's sort of like waking up in the morning. Like at first you're barely awake. You're just warming up to something. And then you come to light about it. Okay. So this extension of consciousness where warmth becomes light and form grows, this brings in two new principles that we're going to look at somewhat in very rough detail. And that is stage and phase. So, we've talked about periods of time, and we've talked about worlds of matter or form, or substance, or space, and we've talked about revolutions of consciousness. That is consciousness turning on itself in the relationship of time and matter. Now we have the same thing in terms of stages. There's a Saturn stage, a Sun stage, a Moon stage, and each of these stages represents a kind of progress. Like the periods of time in themselves and the states of matter are pretty constant. The revolutions of change are also. But there is a staging and a phasing of the staging of the evolving creatures. That is to say that the second stage is a plant-like stage. And that is after there has been enough experience of giving form, the intelligence is awakened so that it comes alive. And this is, there is that law that we've been talking about all along. It's called the law of service. Everything is necessary and everything provides a service. If we look at the world as it is right now, all of the living forms in the material world depend on the plants for life. No animal or no human being can take minerals and synthesize them so that they can be used for life. All of the enzymes, all of what are called vitamins, have their source in the plant kingdom. If there were no plants, there would be no animals or no humans. And so the same thing is true. In the same way that we depend on the minerals to give us form, we depend on the plants to give us life. And we're not only talking about things like enzymes and things like that, we're talking about the etheric vital body that interpenetrated, because that's what came out of all of this. The ability to take life meant a whole new internal consciousness. It's like saying once we've had certain experiences work on us, we turn inward. And when we turn inward, there is a definite change of consciousness and creative ability. And this is to say that this is not an arbitrary thing that a plant-like condition follows a mineral-like condition. It is a logical thing, that life comes out of the experience of form. You might even say it's necessary. Like when the consciousness wakes up, because that's something that is changed in all of this too, the consciousness. Our consciousness in the period that was called Saturn, when the earth was no more dense than a thought, our consciousness was dark, very dark. We had the consciousness of being in a trance. It's something not too dissimilar to if a person is entranced now and you can burn the body or you can stick pins in it or whatever, the consciousness cannot experience that. When it came to the sun period and we became plant-like, we got into what is called a dreamless sleep. If you have the experience, the experience of associating your consciousness with something like a tree. Don't expect all kinds of exciting things to happen if you associate your consciousness with a tree. It will be a very, very dull kind of consciousness. It'll be not blacked out, but it'll be, you can see these things. Wait. I know what you're going to say. There's a difference between the tree and the tutelary spirit of the tree. The tutelary spirit of the tree is pretty wide awake, but the tree itself is not. There's borrowed consciousness.
You're not explaining that there.
All right.
Tutelary spirit. You use these unique words.
Yeah. No, they're not unique at all. All right. They're sometimes called group spirits, but I'll get to that. If we look at things that happen in the perfectly mineral state, there are laws of nature. Water always boils at the same temperature. The elasticity is always the same. It's all altogether different. The chemical reactions in inorganic compounds, meaning compounds that have never been part of a life chain, is very predictable. It happens very quickly, and law is paramount. That's because the consciousness of the mineral is very lowly evolved, and it is easy to be operated on, and because it's completely dumb. You always expect the same thing from the same kind of action on it, and that's what happens. But when the consciousness has been raised to an organic level, to a plant-like level, like all sorts of changes happen in the organic chemistry, for example, and things become very unpredictable because there's more of an independent internal consciousness in the life. No matter how low that grade of consciousness is, there's more of it there than there is in the mineral kingdom. Until finally you get, if you go up the line, there's more and more unpredictability until you get right in the middle, and human beings are right in the middle. Like in one way we're creatures, and in another way we're divine, and we've got a little bit of slip in there. Enough slip so that we can actually err or work against the purpose of it all. But if you go the other direction, again, things become very predictable. Like if you go in the direction of the gods are very predictable because what we call laws of nature are actually intelligences of divinities. And they're predictable because, for the same reason that the psychiatrists claim that psychological health comes with predictability. They love in a rhythmic, orderly, direct, conscious fashion, and the creativity is there all the time. In fact, I don't know if we can really stand to be that creative all the time and stand that consistency of consciousness because we are such creative sluggards. And so it is these beings that work within the creatures, and they work within the creatures in such a way that it's preserved for all history. There's got to be some excitement. So that their intelligence is lent to, that their intelligence is lent to the creatures that are evolving. And these spirits form group intelligences that permeate through the different grades of creatures and bring their intelligence to them until they can experience for themselves. And because that has a teaching quality to it, they're sometimes called tutelary spirits.
Yeah, but is a tree even alive if that spirit isn't there? My feeling is totally opposite, that especially trees are alive. Even in the wintertime, they're really alive.
Yeah.
Energy to spare.
Yes. The withdrawal of active activity does not necessarily mean that the tree is dead. My feeling is you never leave a baby unwatched. And I think that the tutelary spirits pretty much stay with their wards because their wards cannot benefit without their presence, especially in the primitive stages of evolution, like the plant and early animal states. They withdraw when it comes to something like a pet. And within a human being, they're pretty much withdrawn altogether, and we're given our own freedom. But if you're talking about something like a tree, they're always there because there would be not much benefit for the tree if they weren't present.
So I see trees as being fairly lively, though, as opposed to being, quite a bit different from minerals.
Yes, very much so. In fact, because they are uninhibited in their life and they only have to live, that's all they do is live, and they always grow. Everything in the plant kingdom grows. You don't find that in the animal kingdom or in the human kingdom. An animal or a human grows to maturity, which means that the desire body sets in, and they stop growing. But the plant kingdom, which has the vital body only, the etheric body that was for us developed in the sun period, it grows as long as it lives because it's unfettered by any desires or individuation that would keep it from growing. Okay. So that is the stage. The first stage, a Saturn stage, is called the mineral stage. The second stage, the sun stage, is called, let's use the right word, mineral-like, because I'll come to it right off. Plant-like stage. And these are stages of development. But everything is passed along. There is this sort of hand-me-down situation, and that is that at every step of the way, something new is being brought into existence, and something old is going out of existence. So there is a phasing, and so there is a Saturn phase, which means a Saturn phase is a phase by one stage. And the sun phase is a phase by two stages. That is to say that when we became plant-like in the sun period, and the earth now, or the cosmos now, was as dense as our emotions, our feelings and desires. At first it was only as dense as thought, and then it sank deeper into a realm of desire. Everything again begins with thought, because the vital body, the etheric body that now gave life to the new plant-like creatures that we were, that was one realm behind the desire world, and so that was in the world of thought. Everything is always created in the cosmos out of the region of thought. That is the central focus between everything transcendental and everything phenomenal. Everything is created. In fact, we're going to find out much later on that the mind is the central creative focus for everything. And that our ability to take our experiences day by day or life by life or period by period and turn them into divine powers depends on the focus and exercise of the mind, but in a very special way. So there is this constant phasing. So the new the new mineral-like beings became minerals in the desire world. And they were one phase behind us, one stage behind us. All right, that's as much as I want to say. I want to keep going faster. So there is a general recapitulation of everything, and we pass things on to those that follow after us, but it's not just a hand-me-down. It has our experience from having experienced it, but because there is the phasing, that things get phased off phase by phase by phase, the conditions are altogether different. What are now our animals? Like if we go outside and we see an insect, or if we see, for me, I can stay inside and see insects. That's neither here nor there. Or if we see a dog or a horse or a bird or something like that, that was mineral-like when we were plant-like. But its experience of a mineral-like state was in the realm of desire when we had our physical state in the... All right. That shows us very special interaction between us, because their form, the form of the minerals of the sun period, their form is what made our plant-like existence. And so there is a special cooperation between our understanding of vitality as it molds forms and the physical nature of animals. That by watching the vitality, the expression of action and vitality of the animals, we can see evolutionary atavisms that go way back to our beginning in a plant-like state. Yes?
Can that relationship, does that relationship require consciousness on either part of it, and can it be damaged by lack of consciousness? Awareness of?
It could be damaged by malicious activity, even malicious activity in ignorance. I don't think it can be damaged, but I do think it can be enhanced. I think that there are very special connections between us and the animals in relating to form versus life. But it's much too detailed of a topic to go into here. So obviously there is an enrichment process that goes on, because even though because of stage by stage there is a repetition, but because the substance of things and the very nature of what we're working with is constantly changing, it's not just a repetition. We absolutely value, not only because we need the life from the plants or the plant-like creatures, but because we need that experience, because we cannot, that's one of the things of evolution. When you enter into evolution, what gives you the ability to learn things is limitation. And the very fact of entering into evolution is entering into a realm of limitation. And because of that, we can't learn all of the stages by ourselves. And that is why we need all of these other kingdoms that are phased off from us. Because then when we go deep into the cosmic sleep of chaos, and we live as one with all of them, then we get part of the creative genius of the God that is coming from within them, and then we understand not only our forms, but their forms as well, and it becomes part of our creativity and our ability to go forward. It's like experiencing the whole of evolution by by periodically taking a rest and experiencing things that you can't experience directly at the same time, which is another subject that is we could have all kinds of side trips on. See, this is frustrating for me because I've had all of these ideas about this material for years. And so I just wanted to breeze through all of it once and share the basic structure of it and my ideas of it. But then along the way, as I develop the notes, I come to other understandings of how things work and other things I'd like to explore and expatiate on, and then I have a new frustration, and so like one more leads to another, which is probably the way the whole creative process goes that we're talking about. Okay, so there is a change. Things change from warmth to being illumined. But the illumination of the cosmos is like the illumination of what is called the astral world. It isn't this kind of light. It's a light that has its source everywhere. Even though there is a central source, that central source is replicated throughout the cosmos. And as a consequence, there are things like shadows, and it isn't polarized and all of that. It's a totally different kind of light. Yeah?
I like what you're saying there because, how can I say this? Not many people say that. I've kind of thought about that in the past, that it is a different kind of light. For example, it's not clear that it would develop film. I mean, I just don't know. I just don't know. Or it's not clear that it's coming from an atom. Like all of our light usually is traced back to some electronic.
Yeah. Photon.
Yeah, no, but I mean, an electron loses energy, and that's a very nifty process. But it's not clear that comes.
No, yeah, I agree.
Did anybody, if you ever come across anybody who explained what it comes from?
No, I don't
like
think.
Etheric monads or something like that.
No, I have never run into anybody, but it seems pretty much to be taken for granted, which is a problem with the spiritual. Yeah, but Ron, you are a very unique man with an inquiring mind. But if you read a lot of people who have the experience of the astral world,
the whole confusion about like Carillion photography.
Oh, that's the.
But we know, but that's a whole bag of worms in many ways. But I mean, the whole thing there is that you can have something that's physical light, and you say, "Ahoy, that looks like Horus," and by God, it kind of does. But therefore, it is an aura. And how many people made that conclusion in about 2 seconds?
Yes, because they want the material world to substantiate their inner beliefs. But what happens before, I think I've mentioned this before, even in this series of talks, a funny thing happens. When you're out of the physical body and sort of shuck it off and you're one step closer to the divine intelligence, everything seems much more self-evident, even the things that are illusory. And many people see this light and it feels like such a wonderful light, and they just take it for granted that it's there. It is. It's the presence of God, and the spirit of inquiry seems to be lost to those people, and they don't, because of the acceptance. There are problems with being clairvoyant and being in the spiritual world, because in some ways it can lead to a complacency where one no longer questions, because the evidence of the divine is everywhere so manifest that one doesn't want to question it.
Well, I think just one quick thing. I think that is, I have to agree with that. Other people have expanded on that to point to the notions that sometimes, it's hard to say this, but sometimes it seems like some of the saints almost become complacent.
Yes.
And maybe we're wrong, but it sure seems that way, that they're so tuned in that, they don't, they just get out of the world's problems, and their karma keeps them separate, and they're happy forever after,
Mm-hmm.
But that's another question, I guess.
All right.
It is an interesting question. You're probably going to hit on that sometime, right?
he says in a commanding voice.
You know what I mean? It's almost, numerous people talk about that. It's almost like if you're going towards what people call, self-realization, you get into this certain state stage that may or may not be good anymore. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
you have this kind of very practical mind down here, and you're saying, well, you know, you've dropped out of it by going upwards.
Yeah, I agree.
And I'm not sure what's right there.
Right now I have enough sin in me to keep me from becoming complacent, so it's a moot question for me. All right. And at the same time, we have things going from, even though we're going into denser matter, our forms are going from being more rigid to being more soft. If we look at it to this day, we're 2 stages off from our current plants. And if you look at that, the phases too, a plant is much harder in its constitution of the same stuff than a human being is. Okay. Other things that were going on, we went from form to growth and vitality. It's sort of like when the life came in, the form became more plastic. And we went from then a mineral-like stage to a plant-like stage, and the cosmos was more deeply involved. It was now all the way into the realm of desire, emotion, feeling, passion, etc. And finally, we went from dreamless sleep, from trance to dreamless sleep. And in the Venus revolution of the Sun period, we awakened a new spiritual quality. And that spiritual quality is called the life spirit, or the germ of it was there. And in the same way that in the Saturn period, our function was resistance. That by being ignorant and resistant from being plunged into the cosmos, we offered resistance. But that resistance in the body or the matter end of our existence led to the awakening of will as an opposition to resistance. In a similar way, when our whole work was growth or life in forms that could change in themselves, this awakened the experience of all of this plasticity while yet maintaining a form, awakened up the potential of spiritual imagination in us. And by spiritual imagination, I mean that which can imagine the possibility of any form. Not imagining a specific form, but imagining any form. You might say the life that produces form. And so the life spirit then is something that is not filled with the power of will, but it's filled in spirit with a light, bright liveliness, because the intelligence of light on this level is awakened in the creative process. All right, I don't want to get going too slowly here or slow down too much.
I have a question, Richard.
Mm-hmm.
Can you repeat the significance of the Venus revolution and the Sun period?
Yeah, in the Venus revolution in the Sun period is when the life spirit was awakened. Again, we have these reflections that we have Saturn, Sun, Moon, Earth, Jupiter, Venus, Vulcan. And so there is a reflection such that what is accomplished in the involutionary part of these worlds, in the involutionary revolution, Saturn, Sun, and Moon, gets reflected back into a spiritual potentiality. Like this is will and this is form. This is life or vitality, and this is life, spirit, or imagination with a capital I. All right. And then there was another big sleep. Now, mind you, we're going through the slow version, the quick version of this. And again, we all became one. And now we have a double phase, and we came out in what is called the moon period.
Not to interrupt, but are there certain tracks of evolution that just sit through these periods in a couple of months? I mean, I have evidence that happens. Like from plant to animal to human.
That is what an alchemical experiment is. That if one is very, very advanced to what most people's consciousness will be in the distant future, their advancement is accompanied by experiments in evolution that affects what our creative activity will be in the future when we are creative beings. And you can't get there without doing the great experiment, and you can't get there without taking your charges along with you. It isn't a very commonplace thing to have happen, and it's a fact I would consider it very, very, very rare. And there are a lot of other sideline considerations I'd like to go into, but won't. Okay. What happens with the genius of the spirit when it's rested in the principle of growth and vitality? It then says to itself, I don't have to stay in one place like a plant does. Growth, it's sort of like saying that if I produce a form here and produce a form here and produce a form here, and there is a metamorphosis of individual separate forms, and then I go to sleep, and then I wake up and say, I can just put those all together and have a growing living form that changes like that. And then if we go to sleep on that, we say, I can have a form that moves. And that form changes within itself. And it's like saying that there is a waking up of consciousness. And this waking up of consciousness grasps very simple principles, and these simple principles become living power. And so in the moon period, we develop motility. That is the ability to move. And all of this happens now when we have sunk, or the whole concentration of the divine has become more solidified yet, and it is solidified as far as the ethers. We go as far as the realms of energy. And that is to say that our physical body reached the state of motility, separate movement, at the time that we reached the region of energy. But in order to move, this indicates something outside of ourselves, and it indicates something to move toward, a motive. So this becomes the period of motivation, that we desire to move. And so we started all over again. When we came out of chaos, we started over with a physical body, and this physical body now has the ability to take life to it. But when we start building it all over again, it has the principle of desire. And so you might say that things go from form to vitality to desire, And we go from being mineral-like to being plant-like to being an independent creature that can move around, animal-like. And we go from a consciousness of being in a deep trance to being in a dreamless sleep to having an internal consciousness that has pictures. Not necessarily like Walt Disney cartoons, but in some cases not very much different. It's very strange. I used to think not highly of cartoons, and I still don't like them a lot because they're completely flat. And there's no dimensionality. If you look at Dick Tracy, he's always completely flat, and that's not the way the real world is. But there is something in the internal consciousness when soul pictures are there. They take not necessarily, what is the word that I'm thinking of? They're not necessarily
There's a group
character.
I think, behind some of those cartoons. Honest
Yes.
God.
Yes.
It's not even on the screen. The screen just triggers on the experience. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
It just amazed me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the guy was a genius for making some of them.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know if you ever...
But the Walt Disney kind are caricatures. But the internal picture consciousness has depth to it, but it has the simplicity of cartoons because we haven't, at this point, when we were animal-like, we didn't have all of this complexity. And we had very simple ideas. But you can see that this is all, as we go on, it gets more and more and more complicated. And so we had a consciousness then of seeing an internal picture, which becomes a necessity because we're now thinking closer to subject-object. Because if you have an object that can move, that means that there's something discrete there. And when there's something discrete, the degree of separation and the degree of specialization is getting much greater. And when that's the case, you still need some way to communicate to know that there is a common spiritual unity. And so the internal picture consciousness is that with a more awakeness, one can see what the character of another being is like inwardly and with some detail. This is still present in the animals, and still some human beings have this yet. But an animal can look at someone and see the internal picture of what the soul nature of that being is. It's hard to trick an animal. It's very hard to trick an animal with your motivation, because the animal, you do it a lot in play. You know what I'm talking about? The animal senses when you're about to do a mock attack or something like that, because the animal is looking from the desire body. And it takes a great deal of cunning to mask your desires so that the animal can't see it, and so that you can be once removed from your desires and initiate a play attack with the animal. But the animal, for that reason, also knows when something is play. Like little children, infants, can do terrible things to cats, and the cat never scratches it or anything like that. Or if it does, it's a warning shot. My little godson, the cat just leaves the house in terror. And this is a cat that goes out and gets into nighttime fights and maneuvers and things like that. But the little kid, he gets there and he does all these things. The cat never complains. It'll retreat, but because it senses that innocent, and it does that with an internal picture consciousness. And that's what our consciousness became like. All right, we're moving along much more quickly, which is just the way I wanted to do it. So we have increasing separation, increasing softness, but at the same time increasing complexity. We have more things within things, and the whole atmosphere is different. We have to introduce something new. We have to introduce several new things. Obviously, we now have 3 periods of time, and so we have 3 elements. And the first element is fire, which is associated with primary creativity. And that primary creativity we felt in the Saturn period as heat. And that heat was the sacrifice of taking love and putting it into limitation that resulted in heat. Then, when more intelligence came to that light and there was movement so that the heat didn't all stay in one place, it became It became air. And now, when we have the quality in human beings of feeling and emotion, we have water, which has been always associated with the principle of desire. But because the heat is still there, now mind you, the water that we're talking about is not like the water that we see outside. It has the essential qualities of that water, but it's no thicker than a magnetic field. So there is like a fluidic magnetic field that is made out of ether. And this magnetic field is interacting because of the heat being there. There are currents of illumination flowing through it. And so it's like a thickness. It's like vapor. I don't know how to say it. Even now with etheric vision, light has a thickness. And it's like light being reflected off of many, many little waves. You see all the little rainbows and all of the diffractions. And you see light as a fog. In fact, sometimes people, when they're green to it, I knew a chap once, he actually started running, and everybody thought he was crazy. And he was running to keep dry, and it took him a little while before he understood what was going on with the etheric rain. And so there is this foggy, moist, fluidic energy state, but the same thing happens in the macrocosm that happens in the microcosm. That is to say, when we develop this ability now to more separate ourselves and be discrete beings, the same thing happens in the cosmos, so that there is now more like a yoke or a center of heat and more or less a collection of the beings that float through this, you can't really say float, but you can't really say being projected either, that floats through this fiery, foggy cosmos. And it's something like a quasi-planet or a quasi-moon. And in this whole planet is made up of beings. We were, there was no need for all of the specific organs that we have. The ideas that are behind the specific organs we have were being implanted in us by the gods, but because everything was so fluidic, we didn't need the definite organs. And so we were like creatures, we're more like it's described very closely to the way yeast forms in the intestine. It's, how yeast is the intestinal wall looks something like this. And then there are attachments on there, and then there are the little yeast buds like that. Only in this case, the attachments go into inner space. And we are creatures that are sort of floating along on these long, this is the way it's described. It's not to my vision. I haven't had that sight yet. It's described that all of these creatures in this planet, which is indistinct, but definitely, but there's a planet there, but the features are not distinctly marked in it. And we're in this substance, and we're floating along, dangling on these umbilical-like cords, just sort of moving around in space and absorbing the life right straight from the cosmos around us, because the cosmos itself was filled with vitality. There are people right now that talk about being breatharians. They found one of them in San Francisco a few years ago, breatharian. His name was somebody who lives off of breathing. I really believe such a thing is possible, but this fellow was a fake. You heard about him?
I've heard of others.
But this man was a fake. His name was... Yeah. No, but there have been people that have lived... There are a lot of saints that have lived off of basically bread and water, which should have been malnutrient. But this man, they caught him eating Twinkies at 3 in the morning. We thought everybody else was asleep. Great. Yeah. He said, well, I drink a little grape juice when I come in the city because the vibrations are so bad. But normally I live out here in the mountains. And he's giving all of these lectures. And all these people were enwrapped by him. And, he's I live off of breathing. There's this energy that I don't want to, because somebody failed, I don't want to make the whole thing sound hokey, because there is a tremendous amount of energy. And that by being open to it and being almost plant-like about it, you can draw that energy into you. But at any rate, we as these kinds of creatures, these baggy-like creatures, we apparently had the ability to begin to make sounds. And we made screechy-like sounds, but there wasn't air for it to be in, but it was in the etheric sound, and that was the beginning of our expression. And so we were just absorbing this milk of consciousness and sort of flowing. It's something like being in a stream and going with the stream as it goes downhill, but yet having some independent motion of your own. And in this, the basic differences are differences of desire, hot and cold, like and dislike, attraction and repulsion, all of those kinds of things. And from this, we became aware when we developed this independence in the Jupiter revolution as opposed to the Moon revolution. In the Moon revolution, we were full in our desire nature, but in the Jupiter revolution, we unfolded the potentiality of having an individual self with a capital S. And again, you might look at it like saying that when we became discrete and movable beings and we could move, something had to be doing the moving. And so the potential of understanding self and of differentiating self within ideas is what was unfolded in the Jupiter revolution. It's something like this. The divine spirit is like a battery in the dark. And this battery we can't see it, it's covered up, but it has power. But there's something cooking in it. It's like laying your hands on the side of a battery. It's warm. And it's got this power. And then the life spirit is like taking the leads and hooking them to the light bulb. And it radiates light out. And the light itself begins producing living objects. And the light produces the objects weren't there before the light. So this is what the life spirit is like. It's like the light. But then when the life spirit gets broken down into individual characteristics, it becomes bands of color. And right now, the whole realm of desire is a realm of color. That you see colors and you feel the meaning of those colors. When you say a man was so angry he saw red, or you say she had a purple passion, which is not quite true. Probably it would be a musty green passion. Or the French have the famous statement talking about when something very holy is experienced, a very high desire is seen, and they say sacré le bleu, meaning to say that there is a sacred blue that one sees in a certain high state of consciousness. And so then we have power that's turned into light, and that gets differentiated into different kinds of colors. And so then we have, at the end of the moon period, this is a very quick run-through that we've done, we have then, in the physical sense, we have a physical body, or in the material sense, and an interpenetrating life body, and then interpenetrating both of those is a body of emotion and desire. And from those experiences, there is, from the physical body, there is a power of will, and from the vitality, there is the life and light and spirit of imagination, and from the differing emotions, there is the color of being able to form individual ideas. The simplest idea being the idea of self. But only the potentials for those are there. It takes something to actualize. Now, we have to bring out another thing. We complicate this as time goes on. And that is a problem that I've never been able to understand. And that is the problem of non-success. Because some beings in the Saturn period provided so much resistance and stayed part of the macrocosmic globule. It would be like a rock that refused to wear down, or that stayed part of the earth without breaking down. Those beings that were associated in that way had only resistance and didn't understand the relationship of form and resistance. And as a consequence, they didn't take the germ of the divine spirit. So what we're talking about are people that straggled. They didn't keep up with the evolutionary progress. So that leads to very hard questions, which I'll just briefly touch.
This can happen in any stage, right?
It happens at every stage. We're forced with a number of options. I don't think I've explored all of the options, but I find none of them really good options at all. On one hand, the most unpalatable is that some monads or some virgin spirits are not conducive to evolutionary development. And I can't accept that. That is a thesis that is put forth by some people. That's, they say that these, I can't believe that in the state of virginity in spirit, that when things are that undifferentiated and unconditioned, I do not believe that different foci, potential foci of the divine, are inferior or are of a different granularity or grade of potentiality. I can't accept that at all. I'm giving you a personal opinion now. I'm giving you a personal opinion, and you can judge it for yourself. I just don't believe that the basic creative stuff of the cosmos is uneven.
It also implies waste.
Yes. Yes. Dive in.
Well, this basic idea comes up in the Kabbalah and the Bible and stuff, that when the creation moves along, you create successful forms like life forms and plant forms and animal forms. And then there's these spin-offs, which tend to be nasty, like the Platontic spin-offs. And some people will say, well, maybe the elementals are dead ended, on and on and on.
Yeah, but that's not what we're talking about here.
Close, isn't it?
But we're talking about creative experiments, but in the case of, like, we're talking about way back in the Saturn period, we're talking about the basic ability to even participate in being worked on. So, on the other hand, you can't say that it's perverse, because there really isn't a self-consciousness yet. And you can't say that it's a willful not acting in the creation at all. And so that's an option. What does make sense to me is that potentially there is in the preconditioning of the cosmos a differentiation made by the preparing. When we talked about the Zeophim and the Teraphim, that in their conditioning of the cosmos, that they perhaps conditioned in such a way for variety. But the closest that I can understand is that the intractability of some of the beings to not keep up, I think, has to do with something like a pre-preference preference. I think this is the only thing that makes even a little sense to me, that before we were immersed in the cosmos, we were in the bliss, non-self-conscious, but still all-conscious, unconsciously all-conscious. And that in the immersion, something like that, as we took form, the whole immersion experience was built into the taking of form, and form is nothing but the remembrance of an action on something. You know what I'm saying? It exists after the form of itself has gone. The essence that has been impressed into the form is something like a memory. And all, as I can understand it, that memory and looking back in that sense is what is responsible for all straggling. So there was a desire to remember that pre-conscious all-consciousness and hang on to that. And by doing that, it made those beings non-pliable. That's the only thing that makes sense. But at every step along the way, there have been those who have straggled. I think because of the individual nature, various different things can happen so that they can shoot forward again, but it's a difficult subject.
My intuition here is that when I'm thinking of this, somehow I just sort of feel that in order to completely understand it, I have to have a lot more cut onto my faculty. So
Yes. Yeah.
does that make sense?
Yes. 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 Okay, I want to move along. And what I want to do is put up...
Don't you get back to the point of like where we all start, and even in these books,
Yeah.
they still don't say it all, right?
No. Obviously, they don't say it all. It's not experiential. I have this big chart I want to put on the wall. This is part of... What I'm doing now is I'm phasing out of recapitulation notes and phasing into detailed notes. And next week, 2 weeks from now, we'll go on with detailed notes. Oh, by the way, we're talking about Aries tomorrow night, an introduction to the ideas of the signs in the other course. So if you know the people that are interested in hearing all about Aries and long introductions to all the sign types of qualities and such like that. All right. Oh. Which do I like better? I guess I like this one better. Period, revolution, work, hierarchy, status, substance. So this is going to end up being a great big table. Just for a recapitulation, though, there's a lot of different meat in this. So first we have period 0, and the work is set up. And then we have the Xenophim and the teraphim. Associated with those constellations. And our status was elemental. Substance was pre-existent, which is sometimes called cosmic root substance. All right, this is just meant to be review. And we have the Saturn period, and we have the Saturn revolution, and nothing happening in the next 5, and then in the Vulcan revolution we develop. Here we get the work. Here is germ of the dense body. And here we have germ of divine spirit. But because of this resistance, some did not take at this point. So they had only the experience of body, but not the experience of body and the development of will. Whee. And all of this was done by lords of the mind, lords of the flame, I'm sorry, which are sometimes called the thrones. Leo, and the same here. And we had thought minds. Thought minerals, I'm sorry. I was reading my... And here we got the will to be. And the substance was thought and divine spirit. All right. And we come to the sun period. And then we have Saturn and Saturn 1. Saturn 1 is those who develop in the Saturn revolution. They redevelop sense organs. I could have put all of this in here before. All of the Saturn and the Saturn 1 both develop sense organs. But in the Sun revolution, only those that develop the divine spirit unfold a vital body. And then things continue to the Venus period. And some of the beings that have vital bodies now unfold a life spirit. But some of them don't take here. And then we have the Vulcan revolution. And now some of these beings who didn't the first time get the divine spirit now get the divine spirit. All right. This work was done by the Lords of Flame again. And the vital body was brought about by beings called the Lords of Wisdom. Obviously, you can see the first time through in this we went into much more detail. I didn't want to do that all on the... And then when it came to the... all of this was done with the Lords of Wisdom, and then the development of the vital body was the Lords of Wisdom plus the cherubim, which are associated with Cancer. All right. Then we have the germ of the life spirit was done completely by the cherubim. And the Lords of the Flame came back again here for their last appearance. All right, it's awfully complicated. And so we were plants. We had thought vital bodies. I'm not going to put all of this in here. It's just too much. Just too much.
Is this all in Rudolf Steiner?
Yes, it's in Rudolf Steiner. It's in. This is in Max Heindel in the Cosmoconception. It's in Rudolf Steiner in Occult Science. It is also found in not so much with the hierarchs, but First Principles of Theosophy by Inge and it's also in the Scheme of Evolution, which is a compendium from many sources by, I forget the man's name. All right, I don't want to go into all of these things. I just decided it's too much work because we're not going into all of that detail right now because it's just too much. Is that all right with you if we pass on that? All right, we got 10 minutes left? 20 minutes, yeah. I want to end. I don't want to hang on too long tonight. So, at any rate, it comes down to that there, what?
What time is 20 minutes from now?
9 o'clock.
Oh, well, my watch says 5 to 9, but it could be wrong.
Yeah, he means tape time, yeah. We started late. So he's got a timer on the device. So it gets very complicated because various people straggle on down the line. In fact, I've got another table here. So that at the end of the moon period, we have all kinds of classes of beings. All of this you can get out of books. There's no use for me to put up charts on here without all of the explanations. It would be very unfair, and we're just not going into the detailed explanations because out of that I'd never get to move forward on something new. So it turns out that by the time of the end of the moon period, we have life wave A, which is us, that started in the beginning of the Saturn period. And these are the completely successful ones. They have a threefold spirit. And a threefold body. Which means they have a physical body, a vital body to give it life and growth, and a desire body to impel it in motion. A threefold spirit, which is now a complete spirit. It has the germ, anyway, of it. It hasn't been awakened yet. It has the divine spirit, or the force of will. It has the life spirit, or the force of imagination. And it has the human spirit, which is the idea of self. Then we have the A1s. They are failed in the waking of the third attribute of the spirit in the moon period. So they have a twofold spirit. And a threefold body, which is to say that they've come all the way along, and just at the end of the moon period, or in the Jupiter revolution of the moon period, they could not conceive the idea of self. Then we have the A2s, which are the ones that fail to awaken the life spirit in the sun period, but did awaken it in the moon period, but then it was too late to awaken the human spirit. So they have a twofold body, twofold spirit, and a twofold body. Then we have the A3s, who were the ones that straggled in the Saturn period. That is, they didn't wake up the divine spirit, and they had to go through the whole, they had to be minerals all over again. But when they did that, with that extra shot, then they unfolded the divine spirit. And then in the moon period, they were a step behind, and they were plant-like instead of being animal-like. But they did unfold the life spirit because they had all of the extra experience. It normally turns out that you straggled just once, and it's like when you fail a grade and you go through that long recapitulation period, it gives you so much extra experience that you don't straggle again. At least that's the impression that I get. I can't say that from experience from having looked back at them all. So these beings also have a twofold spirit and a twofold body. But their failure was at a different time in evolution, and so their experience is very much different. Yeah. Sure.
It strikes me that the risk then in straggling is being forever out of context.
Yes. Yes. And there are even greater risks at different periods, but we'll come to that in a little bit. Then we have life wave B, the beings that are now are animals, and they have a twofold spirit. And a twofold body. And then there is B1, those that failed in the moon period, so they have a one-fold spirit and a twofold body. And then we have those that failed in the sun period to unfold the divine spirit under different circumstances than us, and they have a one-fold body, one-fold spirit, and a one-fold body.
When you start a new life wave, that's not a result of being behind.
No, but you may have to be with the life wave that is a stage behind you if you can't keep up with your own life wave. I'm going to describe that in just a second. And then finally we have life wave C, and they have, those are the ones that began in the moon period as minerals, etheric minerals, mineral-likes, and they have a one-fold spirit and a one-fold body. And then there are those that only got the body but weren't ready to take the spirit, and that's C1, and those are they have just a one-fold body, and they haven't had their chance yet. All right, now let's see how they look in our times. In our times, these beings that didn't make it to advance to being plants in this period are something somewhere in between a mineral and a plant. And I suspect that they are things like lichens and a lot of these single-celled plants. I don't think viruses, but one step up from viruses. And so they're experiencing things that are quasi-mineral, quasi-plant. And these beings, the regular seeds, have become the plants. But then there are these beings who were the plants have now become the animals. But some of the animals are very primitive animals. And those primitive animals are, some of them still have plant-like qualities, supposedly things like hydras and starfish and things like that. Everything that is below the shellfish in evolution constitutes either B1 or B2 of that life wave, because those things do not have desire bodies, and they can't have desire bodies because desire bodies are manifest. Everything has its physical correspondence. Well, I don't know how to, I'm trying to bring in too much material all at once. And the physical correspondence of being able to relate to the desire world is to have a liver. And livers come into evolution in the shellfish. And such that if you get down into the lower life forms, they do not have livers, and consequently they can't feel desire, and they're more plant-like. And almost all of those, even the shellfish, are somehow rooted in one place, except in BC. They get up and walk once in a while. You know what I'm talking about? You ever see BC's cartoon where the little clams get up? Yeah. And then we have what were the animal likes that have become human likes. Some of them are incapable. All of these classes are at present incapable of having a threefold spirit. That means that they're incapable of doing abstract mathematics. Any being that is incapable of doing abstract mathematics or that can form an idea is in A1, A2, or A3. However, it's not as it looks. Most of the beings that have straggled, and have straggled terribly, we wouldn't normally consider human beings, except if our name is Jane Goodall. According to occultism, the anthropoids do not belong, not the monkeys, but the anthropoids, just the anthropoid apes, do not belong to the animal kingdom. They belong to the human kingdom, but they are slide backs in form in the earth period from the human kingdom. And most of them, so like anybody that you run into, that you can get an idea across to them, and anybody that you can get that can solve an algebra problem is the threefold spirit.
Whoa. What about people who really have a tough time with algebra? They can still go 2 plus 2. Does that put them in there?
Not if they did 2 plus 2 only by memory. But couldn't use it to solve a problem. But not all people that can't do math problems are in these classes, because some people have special blocks toward math because they're developing something else in their in their spiritual consciousness.
Are you talking about potential in any sense?
Yes, we're talking about potential. There are some people that you could not teach it to. Like
Without the equipment.
That's right. Like you'd have a pretty tough time teaching an orang-utang to solve a polynomial. You know, you wouldn't get them to do it. There will come a time when there will be the opportunity to unfold the third attribute of the spirit, and there's always the possibility any time after that they can shoot forward and catch up. Because if you awaken the human spirit, then you can connect it to the life spirit. You go all the way through. And there are different things, and I've pondered this a lot. I do a lot of my pondering in the garden. And there are various different kinds of plants. There are some plants that come to their ripeness after so many days. And then there are some plants that come to their ripeness with the season. And if they get planted at the wrong time, they won't. If they get planted too late, they'll never come to their ripeness, no matter how many days, because they have to be with the season. I tend to think that more of evolution is like the former. With so many days of experience, you will get it. And with that offers the opportunity of catching up. So that even if something is planted out of season, it'll still get its chance to go forward. It's just something, historians think about things like that. They think about the societies that come into the industrial age when socialism is present rather than, we know socialism is the fad of the day instead of capitalism being the fad of the day. And there's a distinct difference in a society where it came into the Industrial Revolution when capitalism was present and that kind of individual initiative. And so the consciousness is altogether different. Like we can see a lot of the Oriental nations, because of being separated from our society, when they came into mechanization and mass production, when they come into that with socialist kinds of attitudes, the society becomes very much like a machine. And I think that different, so what I'm trying to say, there are all kinds of varying conditions that are taking place all at the same time. And obviously, a lot of animals, of our current animals, are pretty primitive also. Some of them go back to being nearly single cell. Okay. I'm going to very quickly talk about a few things to bring us into the basic introduction of the Earth period. And the Earth period is when we are now living. And now the cosmos is consolidated all the way down to the way we see it now. According to the seer's vision, we are now in the Earth globe of the Earth revolution of the Earth period. And we're past the center of that. So we are now at the time, we're just coming out of the deepest ingrainment or entanglement in matter. And so we now have all four qualities. When the genius went to sleep on desire, it woke up and said that there must be a meaning to desire. It's not just adequate to desire something, but there is a reason for desiring it. And so it woke up with the potentiality of having mind. Now we now have four elements: fire, air, water, and earth. Everything is now very complicated, and because there is a very great uniqueness, in the Saturn, Sun, Moon, there's a reflection in Jupiter, Venus, Vulcan. But the Earth period, the fourth, is very unique in that it turns on itself. And that turning on itself has led to a very unusual kind of consciousness that we have now, that, remind you, during the whole involutionary period, we're becoming more and more into matter, and we've been becoming more separated all at the same time. And if you remember, we went from a trance to a dreamless sleep to having internal pictures, to now we have a consciousness that is, we know. We have a truth knower. We have the indwelling spirit is inside, focusing through the mind, understanding the outside. And so the turnaround quality of the Earth period has to do with being able to see the outside and the inside, which comes at the nadir, or which comes at the completion of something. It is the fourth period, and 4 is the number of material completion. It is the number of building. And therefore, the physical body is as refined as it's going to get. It is as complete. And so there is something, when somebody says, prove it to me in the material world, that's not just a shallow materialism. It means that the creative impulse of the physical body has been brought to its fullness. This has something to do with that statement in the Bible, and they saw themselves naked. And there was somewhat of a shame about that, but there was also something of a recognition in that, in knowing all about the state of physical being. Okay. I'm trying to haste, and a lot of these things we're going to come back to. So we have the time of the greatest solidification, densification, separation, formalization, objectification, segregation. That's one set of things. We also have the time where we can, all of these worlds, the worlds that we are now involved in are the world of thought, the desire world, the etheric world, and the physical. In each time before, we had at least one of the transcendental worlds that we worked in. The first time it was all in the Saturn period, it was the world of divine spirit, the world of life spirit, and the world of abstract thought, which is transcendental, and only one world that was concrete, the concrete mind. Now, all of our focus is in phenomenal worlds: concrete reasoning, desire, etheric, and dense physical matter, chemical matter. And with that being the case, we have the opportunity to experience things without the distraction of the spirit, without getting away from the bliss, without being involved with the bliss to draw us off. However, it's very dangerous because there's the greatest possibility of illusion and taking the objects and the things and the phenomenal worlds as the ends in themselves without having the meaning from the transcendental worlds. It requires now, until the spirit is completely and fully indwelling so that we see through the physical worlds and into the spiritual worlds, it requires a parallelism so that we have an intuitive parallelism. Otherwise, we will be lost in phenomenalism. And it's a time of great freedom because the gods cannot work directly in this world. When we once became self-conscious, the gods had to lay off of us. They still affect us indirectly through astrology and things like that. And some people still need guardian angels and race or religious spirits to guide them around. But for the most part, we're free. And they can't really, in some ways they can influence us from the inner world. But basically we're free. We don't see any of the gods walking around here. And you might say that we're quarantined here or that we're exiled here, but in a way we're very free. It's like, like you've got your own room, you've got your own place that you can go to without direct interference. And that's a really wonderful condition, and it gives us a tremendous responsibility. We can be creative and we can make the world be what it is, but we owe a great debt because we are the only conscious, waking, self-conscious beings in this exiled external world, and therefore it is up to us to feed the gods. All right, I'm whipping along here as quickly as...
Feed the gods what?
Feed the gods our experience of the external world, because they don't have any eyes or ears or anything in this world but ours. And they don't have the kind of consciousness that we have for seeing